Outside my bedroom window, I heard birds chirping when I woke up. It was almost too quiet in the house. The silence of the early morning was broken only by the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Even though Emma's room was just down the hall, I could tell she was already awake. Even at the quietest moments, her energy always gave her away, so I didn't have to check. Look at the clouds. Mommy! With the naive awe that only a 6-year-old could have, her voice reverberated down the hallway. I grinned and pulled the covers tightly over me before making myself get out of bed. I tried to sound upbeat as I called. Not today, sweetheart. Today is going to be a hectic day. Daddy is about to depart. As I crept out of bed and into the hallway, I couldn't get rid of the nagging uneasiness over the years of living in this house. I had become used to the sound of the floors creaking beneath my feet. Although time had worn it down, the 2-story house we had purchased so many years prior still had some of its original elegance. No amount of washing could remove the stains on the carpets, the creases in the walls, and the smudges around the doorways. Although it wasn't flawless, it belonged to us. Richard was already downstairs, sipping his coffee with his towering form resting on the kitchen counter. He gave me that kind, endearing smile he saved for those who were important to his career. He murmured, "Good morning, Mary," but his tone was aloof, even preoccupied. He reminded me that he had a crucial business meeting that weekend, but there was something about his speech that made me shudder. I tried to get rid of the feeling that something wasn't quite right as I prepared the breakfast table. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But there seemed to be an increasing tension between Richard and me. Richard had been colder and more aloof ever since my mother died 3 months ago. He had started making more late-night phone calls. And whenever I attempted to talk to him about anything other than the routine, he was always busy. As he prepared to depart for work, Richard tucked his bag under his arm and remarked, "I'll be back on Monday. Don't worry, though, I'll bring you something pleasant. A small present for my young princess." Emma gave her father a radiant smile while she sat at the table eating cereal. "Daddy, what is it? What are you going to bring me?" My heart pounded when Richard gave her a wink. He had always had a unique bond with Emma, which frequently made me feel alienated inside our own family. I experienced a strange but fleeting sense of relief as Richard departed the house. After he had gone, the home seemed eerily quiet. Despite the size of my mother's fortune, I had not yet made any firm plans, so I went to the office to sort through her possessions. Everything was too much to bear. "Look at this! Mommy!" Emma, holding an antique image in her tiny hands, rushed into the office. It was of me and my mother in front of the garden we used to go to every summer when I was a little child, with my mother's arm around me. Emma's naive face turned to mine as her eyes glistened with interest. "Is Grandma missing you?" She held the picture out to me and asked. My heart ached from the loss. So I stopped. I said quietly, "Of course, sweetie. I long for her every day." Emma nodded, her eyes averting for a second. She said quietly, but with a weight I couldn't quite pinpoint, "Grandma told me the truth," uncertain of what she meant. I blinked. "Honey, what do you mean?" "It's a secret," she muttered, her mischievous eyes sparkling. I laughed uneasily. "Oh, I see. Sweetheart." "It's all in your head. Although Grandma is no longer with us, her memory can live on in our hearts." Emma's subsequent remarks, however, stopped me cold. "Mommy, Daddy and Grandma are concealing something," she said. "It's a secret," in a tone so solemn that I felt my breath catch in my chest. My phone buzzed on the desk before I could answer it. Richard was on his way, leaving earlier than expected. His focus shifted to the business meeting for which he had been preparing. I was uncomfortable, but I didn't want to express it. There was a problem. The home was heavier than it had ever been that night. No matter how hard I tried to concentrate on the simple things: dinner, Emma's bedtime, the routine minutia that used to provide solace, the tension in the air persisted. Emma was behaving strangely. Her customary flair had dulled, and she was more reserved and quiet. She turned her head away from me as I kissed her forehead and tucked her into bed. Her eyes were wide with an unexplainable fear, and there was something about the way she stared at me. "Can we spend the night in your room, Mommy?" Her voice was little, almost too small for her age, and she asked softly, "Of course, sweetie," I answered, maintaining a calm tone of voice despite my internal cracking. I made an effort to persuade myself that it was only a passing phase or a child's transient anxiety, but I knew otherwise. Emma felt something wasn't right. She was always aware. I tried to get used to the quiet as we slid into bed together and the covers pulled tight around us. I couldn't sleep, though. My thoughts kept returning to what Emma had said earlier in the day. With a tone too solemn for a 6-year-old, she had declared, "Daddy and Grandma are hiding something." By that, what did she mean? What secret might they be harboring? I made an effort to convince myself that I was exaggerating and that it was only a child's fantasy. However, my entire being was screaming that it was more. The silence pressed in from all sides as the clock continued to tick. I made an effort to concentrate on Emma's soft breathing pattern, but it simply made me feel more uneasy. The screen of my phone was black, but always there as it rested on the nightstand. I hadn't heard from Richard since he left earlier that morning. I was unable to replace the emptiness left by his abrupt departure in the house. In reality, what was he doing? Furthermore, why hadn't he answered my messages? At midnight, my phone began to buzz. Richard sent a message, "I'm going to return early tomorrow. Something to talk about." It stated nothing more. I felt a weird uneasiness twist in my gut as I glanced at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. My calls had gone unanswered all day, and now this. What was so crucial that he was unable to discuss it over the phone? I heard a faint but distinct sound, a automobile engine, before I could do any more analysis. I sat up and paid close attention. It came from the driveway, the quiet of the night broken by the gentle hum of an engine. Silently, I crept out of bed and headed for the window. I could make out the outline of a black SUV sitting in front of the house through the darkness. I could see a guy strolling slowly around the property, even though the headlights were off. He was tall, wore black, and moved purposefully, as if he were looking for something. A beat skipped in my chest. With my heart pounding, I retreated from the window and hurried back to Emma's side. I couldn't help but notice the panic rising in my chest, but I didn't want to startle her. "Mommy, what's going on?" Emma's voice was heavy with sleep as she asked. "I'm not sure, honey," I answered, attempting to control my breathing. "Let's keep quiet, will we? We will simply be here for a little while." I got back into bed and covered the two of us, but I couldn't fall asleep. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something horrible was going to happen, and the sound of the engine was still audible. I tried to relax myself by holding Emma close to me, but my instincts were telling me that we had to go. Everything happened so quickly the following morning that I hardly had time to take it all in. When I woke up, Richard was already gone, but the feeling of dread remained. Without him, the home felt chilly. I made an effort to maintain appearances by getting ready and making Emma breakfast, but on the inside, I was falling apart. The phone call then arrived. Helen sent it. "Is Richard present?" "Mary." Her voice was strangely strained as she asked. Trying not to seem serious, I answered, "No, he left early this morning." "Is there a problem?" Helen was quiet for a while. "No, there's nothing wrong," she replied. "Just please update me. I'll give you another call later." The talk lingered in my head like a sour taste when I hung up. Why did she want to know Richard's location so badly? Emma was standing by the window once more, her tiny fists pushed to the glass. When I turned to face her, she was just staring out with a detached, almost dejected gaze without saying anything. "My dear, what are you staring at?" I walked up behind her and asked her softly. Emma gently turned and looked into my eyes. I couldn't identify it, but there was something about those eyes. She spoke softly, as if she were talking to herself, and continued, "I'm waiting for something to come." "What am I waiting for?" With my heart starting to race, I asked. She shrugged and answered, "I'm not sure, but it will happen like a sinister prophecy." The words lingered in the air. I couldn't deny the sensation that had taken hold of my gut, even if I wasn't sure if she realized what she was saying. There was an impending event, and it wasn't good, whatever it was. The silence in the house was intolerable by noon. I'd gone about my day, running errands and calling the museum, but I couldn't get rid of the nagging suspicion that something was hiding beneath the surface. Every car that passed outside made me freeze, and every squeak of the floors had my heart skip a beat. Richard had not given a call. Since the text this morning, I hadn't heard from him, and now I couldn't stop thinking about his face. He had been behaving oddly, more aloof than normal. Emma was unique. She was a shadow of herself, more reserved and silent. I could see she was noticing something. Children do, don't they? What we strive to hide, they see. Long before we acknowledge it to ourselves, they sense the stress in the air. Mom, Emma's quiet, tiny voice drew me back to the here and now, and the windows as if she were measuring something in midair. At last, she raised her head to gaze at me with the same serious face. Will we be all right? Mommy. Her question was hardly audible above a whisper. I felt sick to my stomach. I tried to force a grin as I knelt down in front of her, but I could already feel the cracks beginning to appear. We certainly are. We're all right. I grabbed her hand, but she resisted. She answered in a tight voice, no, we're not. A negative event is about to occur. It will. Even though I don't want it to, I felt the panic gnawing at the back of my mind as I swallowed forcefully, my throat drying out. How could I let her know that I was also unsure of what was going on? That I was no longer sure whom I could trust? I steadied myself by forcing a breath. My dear, why do you say that? Emma took a while to respond. Her little forehead was furrowed as she simply gazed out the window once more. She seemed to be looking at something far away from our tiny dwelling. When she eventually whispered, I heard them. Her voice was so low that it seemed almost like she was speaking to herself. Grandma and Daddy, they had a sinister scheme. I overheard them conversing. My heart stopped beating. The blood in my face started to run out. I couldn't ignore the fact that this wasn't merely her imagination. Emma, what did you hear? Even though my voice wavered, I made an effort to remain composed. After Daddy said, if she's gone, everything becomes mine, the remarks were like a kick to the stomach. As I fought to keep standing, my world shook on its axis as the room whirled around me. It was difficult for me to swallow the bile that had risen in my throat. It all felt wrong. Do you really think you heard that? Despite my best attempts to remain calm, my voice broke as I asked, Emma. The puzzle's parts were beginning to fit together. What were Richard and his mother up to? Why didn't I anticipate this? Emma knew something that I didn't. And I realized with a sickening feeling in my chest as I looked at my daughter, standing there so brave and serious. She was aware from the beginning. I hurried to my feet, trembling as I went over the potential reasons. None of them made sense. But then my attention was drawn to something else. The policy for life insurance. The one I had discovered the previous evening in Richard's study. Emma's warning, the odd discussions, the phone calls, and the life insurance policy that was issued only a week after my mother passed away all made sense to me. All of this was building to one terrible end. With shaking fingers, I reached for my phone and dialed Richard's number. Once, it rang. Twice, voicemail follows. No God. I made repeated attempts, however, nothing. No response. As I tried to calm myself, my mind was racing and my stomach was in knots. I had to think straight. We were in danger. And Emma was right, however. From whom? Richard, was he? Was it his mom? Both of them. I was at a loss for what to do. I was unable to remain here. Not with Emma, not with what I'd just discovered. I had no idea who I could trust anymore, and the walls were closing in. When it was appropriate, Richard had always been a charming husband and father. But what if all I believed to be true about him turned out to be false? I turned to face Emma, who was standing in the corner, her big, trusting, and afraid eyes observing me. Although I had no idea what would happen next, I was certain that I would not allow anything to happen to my kid. I took hold of her hand and gently drew her to the rear entrance. I said, a bit too loudly, Emma, we have to go now, but it made no difference. I had to do something. Emma gave a fast nod without hesitation or question. She, like me, had anticipated this moment. We made our way to the door, but I hesitated as I reached for the handle. Steps. From across the house came heavy, purposeful footsteps. Richard. It was too late. The sound of footsteps was getting closer and louder, and I nearly passed out from the panic that accompanied it. I didn't know what Richard was planning when he returned. I'm not sure if he was aware that I knew. I wasn't sure whether he was coming to see me or to complete the task that he and his mother had begun. Emma gripped my hand tightly. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her shaking next to me. As always, when things were getting terrible, she knew what to do. I looked back toward the front of the house where I could clearly hear Richard's footsteps. He was en route. I couldn't afford to squander time. We have to go. Emma, now. You get it. With barely a breath in my voice, I uttered an eager whisper. Emma didn't require 2 reminders. Her little face was pallid yet determined as she nodded. She was aware of our escape route. With my heart racing in my chest, I dragged Emma through the kitchen and toward the back door as discreetly as possible. I reached for the handle and froze when I tried to turn it. It refused to move, panic increasing. I jerked the door once more, locked. The outside of it was locked. I didn't know how or why, but I didn't have time to find out. "Mommy, what's going on?" Emma spoke in a gentle tone, but the dread in her voice made my stomach turn. I didn't respond to her. Rather, I glanced around the room rapidly, my thoughts racing. I had to reflect. Then I caught a whiff. Gasoline. I was struck like a wall by the strong chemical smell that permeated the kitchen, seeped through the window crevices, and clung to the air around us. When I understood what it meant, my heart fell. As I began searching the room, I yanked Emma behind me and commanded her to keep close. I quickly glanced at the pantry, cupboards, and walls in an attempt to find a way out. That's when I noticed it. A little entrance, nearly out of sight, was located behind the pantry shelves. I didn't hesitate even though the doorframe was covered in dust, as if no one had touched it in years. I walked over to it, my fingers clutching the handle and tugging. With a creak, the door opened to expose a dim, cavernous passageway that looked like something from an old home mystery. Fear rushing through my veins. I paused for a second before Emma's tiny voice calmed the raging tempest inside my head. "It's the secret passage, Mommy. In my dream, Grandma told me about it." I was hearing things that I nearly couldn't believe. A passageway hidden away. I was so confused that my brain was spinning. Was this a trap of some kind? Was Emma's imagination playing tricks on her? However, the gasoline and the flames seemed all too real. I had no other option. With a tense voice, I turned to Emma. "Go first, my love. I'll follow closely after you." Emma nodded mindlessly and entered the dim hallway as if she had done it 1,000 times. We crawled through the cramped little room as I followed her, keeping my back to the walls and my body low. I didn't care if cobwebs and dust stuck to my flesh. The musty, heavy smell of the air was preferable to the gasoline odor steadily creeping into the house. We probably crawled for only minutes, but it felt like hours. Considering everything I had learned, my mind continued to race. Richard's treachery, Helen's meddling, the insurance contract, Emma's cautions. All of it was fading into confusion and terror. Emma, however, was composed, too quiet. She spoke steadily, as though she were strolling through a park on a sunny day. "Mommy, it's not far now." "This passage refers to the garden shed," Grandma replied. "The shed, the ancient garden shed, the location where my mother once kept gardening supplies and old tools." How Emma knew all of this baffled me, but I didn't have time to question her at this point. We needed to leave. At last, a weak but genuine light emerged in front of us. Relief caused my chest to constrict. We had nearly arrived. "Mom, act quickly," Emma said in a voice that was urgent. My body ached as I tried to go more quickly, but I pushed her forward and pulled her through the passage. Smoke now filled the air, heavy and scorching, as if the house were falling apart. The slightest sound, a low rumble, as if something were shattering, could be heard behind us. The flames was drawing nearer. With shaking hands, I pushed open the little door as we came to the end of the tunnel. The shed was seen when it creaked open. The yard was covered in lengthy shadows from the feeble morning light. But it was the fresh air I needed. We had freedom. Emma was the first to scramble out, running for the shed door with her tiny boots thudding on the floor. I followed, but as soon as I was outside, there was a big bang from the home, a deep rumbling sound that made the ground tremble. I didn't understand how quickly the fire had spread. My eyes widened in terror as I turned around and saw the thick, choking black smoke rising from the house, the flames licking at the walls and consuming everything in their course. Emma tugged at my sleeve and said, "Mommy, we have to go," in an urgent tone. I was unable to look away from the house. The location where we used to live, where everything had been so typical, or so I believed. We fled from the house, the smoke, the fire, and everything else as we hurried toward the street. However, it wasn't finished yet. Richard's whereabouts were still unknown to me. I was still in the dark about what had actually transpired. However, I was certain that Emma had come to our rescue. My mind was still racing and my pulse was still pounding by the time we arrived at Barbara's house. Emma's tiny hand was firmly holding mine, and I felt terrified for the first time in a long time. I'm scared for her. I'm afraid. I was terrified of everything that had occurred and everything that was yet to come. Barbara didn't ask any questions when she opened the door. She didn't have to. She noticed the fear in our eyes and the soot on our clothing. She drew us in and surrounded us with the warmth of her house without saying a word. I made an effort to control my breathing, but each time I closed my eyes, I could see the home being licked by flames, feel the smoke burning in my lungs, and hear the house creaking as it collapsed. Everything was genuine. What happened? Mary, Barbara inquired, her eyes wide with worry but her voice quiet. I had to inform her everything had to be explained by me. However, the words refused to come. I was still trying to piece together what had happened over the past few hours, Emma's warnings, Helen's meddling, and Richard's betrayal. Still no responses, no obvious explanation. I began to say, Richard, but my voice trailed off. I felt so bitter that I was unable to even utter his name. He attempted to murder us. Barbara. I could see the disbelief in her eyes as her face became pale. What are you discussing? I glanced down at Emma, who was sitting peacefully next to me, her little face as calm and serious as ever. I inhaled deeply and described everything: the insurance policy, the fire, the secret passage, the phone calls, everything. Barbara didn't interrupt, and every word I spoke made her face look more scared. Richard was someone she knew. He had been spotted by her in the area. People admired him because he was a polished and pleasant man. The darkness beneath the surface could not have been known. There was a long pause when I was done. Barbara looked at us, obviously trying to figure out what was going on. At last, she stated in a tense voice, I'm calling the police. This is more than I could have ever dreamed. Officers taking statements, sirens, and flashing lights filled the following few hours. I tried to calm Emma and shield her from the stress of it all while we sat in Barbara's living room. By the time the authorities got there, the fire was already contained, but I could still smell the heavy, oppressive smoke in the air. What did you find, Mary? One couldn't stop thinking about the question. How could I have missed it? What was it I hadn't noticed? How long had Richard and Helen maintained this lie? I didn't remember the pictures until the investigator asked for any supporting documentation. With my hands shaking, I took out my phone and showed him the photos I had taken of the life insurance documents, the ones that proved the worst and linked Richard to the plan. As he looked over the pictures, the detective nodded solemnly and stated, I'll need to take these. This is sufficient to proceed. We'll look into this in great detail. So they did. Richard was located 3 days later. The truth was revealed in fragments. He had lied about the business trip. His debts, his mistress, and his financial difficulties were all revealed. It also brought with it the entire scope of his treachery. He had been living a lie-based life and preparing to start over with my mother's money. It wasn't just Richard, though. Helen, his mother, was equally at fault. She had been involved in the plot from the start, supporting Richard's schemes and giving him the ability to control me and light the fire. She had a straightforward motive. Even if it meant murdering his wife and daughter, she wanted her son to succeed. The trial was drawn out, agonizing, and complicated. Richard attempted to place the responsibility on his mother, saying that she had forced him to participate in the scheme. However, the proof was unmistakable. He told too many lies to hide them. At last, the truth had come to light, and it could not be denied. The pivotal moment was Emma's testimony. She was 6 years old when she appeared in the courtroom, her words clear and her voice steady. She filled them in on everything, including locating the house drawings, hearing Richard's chat, and discovering the hidden passage. It was she who had rescued us. Emma had stated calmly, Daddy said, if she's gone, everything becomes mine. And the words reverberated around the courtroom. The jury was forced to pay attention. Emma's testimony, the insurance policy, the phone calls, and the proof were all too compelling to overlook. Helen was given an 8-year term for conspiracy, while Richard was given a 15-year sentence for attempted murder. Although it was a bittersweet win, justice was served. After several months, everything gradually started to get back to normal, but it was difficult. The treachery left severe wounds. Emma was still having trouble processing what she had seen, although the therapy was helpful. The trauma could not be removed. Love, patience, and time would be required. However, we were still alive. We were also at liberty. I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't experienced in years as I stood on the porch of our new house, a modest home in the Boston suburbs that was very different from the palace we had previously occupied. Although it was smaller, the new home felt warm. We owned it. It was secure. Emma laughed and raised her most recent drawing in the air as she rushed past me. Mommy, the first succeeded, she said with excitement in her voice. It will be on display during the school's art show. I grinned as pride filled my heart. That's fantastic. My love, Grandma would be very pleased with you. Emma smiled. Mommy, I believe she is keeping an eye on us. We'll be all right, she always assured me. My eyes filled with tears, but I suppressed them. Despite all the suffering, I had come to realize that family was more than simply blood. It was about love and always standing by one another. Grandma's keeping watch over us, I said in a quiet but confident voice. Daddy is too. Emma, we will always have one another. Always. And I knew that we would face whatever happened next together as we stood there in our new house. Life often puts us to the test when we least expect it. Mary and Emma's trip was filled with unfathomable terror and betrayal. Nevertheless, they discovered a reality that we must all keep in mind. Our relationships are our most valuable possessions. We occasionally put our faith in people we love and respect, only to discover that they have the capacity to harm us in unexpected ways. Our tenacity is demonstrated during those times when everything appears to be falling apart. Even if we may not know everything, we are strong enough to keep on. We can select who we let into our life moving forward. We can heal and we can rebuild. Being willing to confront our concerns head on is the best present we can give to ourselves and the people we care about. To have faith in our own instincts as well as in other people. Mary's strength stemmed from her capacity to defend her daughter and believe in their love, even when everything around them seemed to be falling apart. Not from her confidence of what would happen next. It serves as a reminder that the people we care about can bring us brightness even in the darkest of times. And occasionally, we only need that light to guide us out of the shadows. Therefore, never undervalue your own fortitude and never undervalue the relationships of love and trust you have developed with the people who are most important to you.